To be on stage with this group of people that are telling these amazing stories in a fearless way, that is the best part of it.
It's okay if you have these struggles and you're not crazy and your mental illness does not define who you are.
This is what it's about. It's hearing real stories from the community. Every time a story is shared, we break down the stigma. I want people to know that it's like your neighbor and your friend and your sister, and we need to talk about it.
Just the fact that this many people support it and are in to help us out was really, really fulfilling.
The audience sees a piece of themselves in these stories and they relate and they feel more brave to then open up in their own circles.
It's almost like they're standing up a little straighter, and they're talking a little louder, really taking ownership now of what they've been through.
I think it's important for people who are caught up in this to be able to look and see flesh and blood of people that have been through it and have recovered and have had happy, successful lives. It's electrifying to me. This is one of the most invigorating experiences that I've ever had.
So I myself live with type 1 bipolar, and I had been hospitalized 4 times for manic episodes, and it was all very traumatic and very isolating. But I started writing, and writing helped me with my healing process. And I was writing on a blog, but I was writing anonymously because I was afraid of being judged. But an editor from a major website saw my writing and wanted me to write for them. And when she invited me to write for their website, I just decided I'm done hiding behind a pen name. I'm gonna just write with my real name. I'm proud of my life. And all this support came out. All these people said, thank you for sharing your story, but at the same time, they would turn around and tell me their story. So I saw that it opened up these lines of communication. I started the organization back in 2013 with a co-founder, and she and I had the idea to bring these stories to the stage, to put a spotlight on mental illness, to end stigma one story at a time. And so we put the first show on by just saying to our community, we want to tell these stories, and people came forward. The goal tonight is to share these true personal stories that are going to be told through creative expression. We do that because it's each person's unique way to tell their journey through living with mental illness, living with addiction, and we're just so thrilled that the Wheeling community and that NAMI Greater Wheeling has come together with youth services to put on this show.
I wrote a poem specifically for the show and for the audition, and a week later I got a call. So I don't think anything like this has ever come to Wheeling before. People don't really talk about mental illness like they're supposed to. It's not really accepted as much as it could be. If you say, oh, I'm depressed, there's still gonna be people who are like, oh, you're faking it, like you're just sad, just be happy. But this is definitely really important to make people understand that there are people of all ages who suffer from so many different mental illnesses, and we're not faking it and we're not crazy. I'm one of the younger people of the cast. I'm only 18, so I'm hoping to not only show like the older people of the audience, but the younger people that it's okay if you have these struggles and you're not crazy and your mental illness does not define who you are.
Our next storyteller is Samantha Pearl. Samantha is an 18-year-old freshman at Duquesne University. She spends most of her time exploring Pittsburgh, although she prefers hiking through nature, especially around the Tunnel Green area in Wheeling. She hopes to one day expand her civil rights activism by tackling issues from a legal standpoint as an attorney. Her main passion is performing her poetry and using unique mediums to convey social and personal dilemmas to large groups of people. Please welcome Samantha Pearl.
Point to a light switch and say, hey, that's what my emotions are like. The light is on and you're happy and confident. The light turns off
and you're in the black and gray landscape of depression. Sometimes there are power outages of suicide attempts or power surges of anxiety attacks. There is no pattern. There are only a few hidden triggers. Even though I'm only 18, I have the privilege of drinking the fruity cocktail of both depression and anxiety. Dual diagnosis. Sometimes it's so interesting when the lights are out and there's a power surge. Flickering lights that keep going on, off, beep, 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 beep. Sounds familiar, right? Hospital noises. A heart monitor and oxygen bag. My first panic attack. Thank you, abusive ex-boyfriend. Fast forward 1 year later, where yet another winter has turned my lights off. Actually, there was a power outage. I had been mentally and emotionally manipulated for 6 months, and the day after my senior prom, he destroyed my power lines in Transformers, a citywide blackout, ending in an ambulance ride, a painful IV in my left arm, 2 bags of charcoal forced down my throat, an entire bottle of pills spilling out of my stomach acid and into a small blue bag, finally ending the night with a 48-hour stay in the ICU. Again, thank you, abusive ex-boyfriend number 2. But after that power outage, I learned to reinforce my home with a generator. Prozac, 20 milligrams. Replacing my siding with brick walls to protect me, appreciating the good times and planting flowers of hope in my windowsills. I will no longer be desecrated. Years of experience have given me the policies and procedures of coping. Bunker for tornadoes, fire escape route with extinguishers, sewer drains for the floodwaters. Nothing can hurt me. Nothing can ever truly break me down again. Even a wrecking ball could not cause the spiral into depression or anxiety. I am resilient and strong and capable of anything I set my mind to. See, I have a superpower. Instead of falling into a nuclear reactor, an imbalance of chemicals resides in my brain. And I have the power to conduct electricity, to control the synapses firing in my brain enough to keep them from turning the lights off. My mental illness does not define me. My 72-hour stay in a mental institution does not go on my resume. Anxiety attacks and hyperventilation will not go on my college diploma. My name is not generalized anxiety disorder. My name is not clinical depression. My name is Samantha, and I am not crazy. Nice to meet you.
Wow, what an amazing evening, right? Wow. Our next storyteller is David George. David has lived most of his life in Wheeling. He's an author, advocate, consultant, and spokesperson for persons who live with learning disabilities, autism, and all persons who live with any so-called disabilities or challenges. David is interested in participating in This Is My Brave to enlighten everyone that persons who suffer from things that make them appear different to others are in many ways just as normal as other people. And they deserve to be encouraged to be the best that they could be and be unconditionally accepted for who and what they are. Please join me in welcoming David George.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, my name is David A. George, and I am honored to speak in front of all of you on behalf of This Is My Brave. As an author of a partially autobiographical self-help book entitled Be Unique, Be You, and Live, and as an advocate and spokesperson for all persons who live with attention deficit disorder, learning disabilities, autism, and all special needs, I know what it is like to live with the realities of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. I grew up in the Wheeling area. I attended Bethany College, just some 20 to 25 minutes north of Wheeling. I was admitted through the special education program, which was facilitated by Dr. Chris Sampson at the time. The people at Bethany were very much a family to me, and I felt very much at home there. They helped me understand that I was intelligent in my own way, and though I had to work much harder than most of the other students, I could still succeed in college and in life. I earned a 3.25 GPA toward the end of the first semester of my freshman year. The following semester, I pledged Sigma Nu fraternity and ended up making some of the greatest friends of my life, who are still like brothers to this day. The girls that I either went out with or were friends with became like sisters, and they're all still like brothers and sisters more than ever now. I earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in communication, specializing in the broadcast field. Then I worked in the radio field for a few years. I then attended graduate school at both West Virginia University and Marshall University while attempting to earn a master's degree in counseling and earned a 3.8 GPA. While trying to complete my degree at Marshall, though, I realized that there was more that I needed to learn about the plight that I had with attention deficit disorder and a severe learning disability. I moved back to Wheeling shortly after. I consulted with Dr. Chris Sampson from Bethany, and she recommended that I speak with Ms. Judy Bosley, who worked as a vocational rehabilitation counselor for the West Virginia Division of Rehabilitation Services in Wheeling. Ms. Bosley worked with me to help me find what would be the most suitable job for me to work in. Eventually, I started working in the Human Resources Department of West Banco here in downtown Wheeling. However, I always knew that I had the creative mind of a sensitive artist who loved to write. At the same time, I was trying to find out why I was forced to live with the realities of ADD and a severe learning disability, yet trying to find meaning to my life so I could determine what my purpose would ultimately be. Interestingly, while Ms. Bosley was helping me, I became reacquainted with Father Pat Condren, who was the former chaplain at Bethany College when I attended. He introduced me to God for the very first time. When I continued to work at the bank, I moved back to Bethany, which still was like a home and family to me. And while living at Bethany, I worked diligently on my book. However, I came to the realization that I did not get the emotional nurturing and guidance and support that I so needed badly while I was growing up before I attended Bethany. I became painfully aware of how there were too many things that were unfulfilled from my life so many years before. This generated a devastating retroactive effect on me, which exacerbated feelings of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. The PTSD that I developed was derived from the trauma of being excessively humiliated, mentally abused, and chronically isolated, which festered feelings of bitterness, rage, hatred, and guilt. I realized I was forced to grow up too fast in one way, and in another way, I was not granted the opportunity to really grow up at all. This helped me understand that I needed to go to therapy, which took many years to work through. Besides receiving therapy and spiritual counseling, my Bethany friends and several other friends gave me their love and support, which compelled me to work harder on my book and find peace with myself. My book was printed 5 years after starting therapy. 1 year after my book was published, I became involved with a Bethany College theater production of The Who's rock opera, Tommy. Music was always a major inspiration to me, and as a youth, I was compelled. I wanted to be like Pete Townsend and Roger Daltrey of The Who. They were The Who, and lots of other rock bands were my idols, but I just wanted to just windmill like Pete Townsend, and ride a rock and roll horse like Roger Daltrey with that lasso, and just totally kick ass. But yes. Well, anyway, but I always felt that the story, The Who's Rock Our Tommy, I always felt that the character and story created by Pete Townsend was very similar to my story. There's even a passage about Tommy in my book, just before the conclusion. And rock operas were very compelling to me, especially storylines that represented the protagonist as being precluded and excluded due to unfair circumstances. Tommy is undoubtedly one of them, and so are Pink Floyd's rock opera The Wall and Rush's rock opera 2112. On the day of the Sunday matinee of the Tommy extravaganza in Bethany, someone asked me if she thought my learning difficulties were derived from autism. This compelled me to find out for sure. And after 4 months of very thorough and meticulous testing, the evaluation was some 15 pages long, I was rendered the diagnosis of what is known as Asperger's syndrome, a highly functional kind of autism. In conjunction with that, I was diagnosed with an unconventional, nonverbal learning disability, along with not being able to absorb, comprehend, and multitask at the pace of others. This brought personal closure to me. It also became an added dimension to my mission to become a full-time spokesperson, advocate, mentor, and liaison for persons who live with special needs and so-called disabilities. My goal is to bring people together in the community in a way which all unique individuals would feel more consistently cultivated, integrated, and included. And music is a very profound inspiration and, that hopefully could bring people together even more. And I'd like to be a major part of that. I wish to emphasize that a person's so-called disability should never beget an inability to share his gifts, talents, and knowledge with others, and to help them lead the most fulfilling and productive lives. In time, hopefully all persons will have more opportunities to lead meaningful, productive lives when we come to employment and having healthy, significant relationships with others who live in the same community. This way, everyone will have the golden opportunity to evolve, flourish, and transcend into the most well-rounded, unique individuals that they could be. Then everyone will have the chance to be unique, be you, and live. Thank you.
Be unique, be you, and live. What a great accomplishment, David. That's awesome.
I think it's important for people who are caught up in this epidemic to be able to look and see flesh and blood of people that have been through it and have recovered and have had happy, successful lives. So that's why, as an old man, I'm coming out and saying I'm an ex-drunk. I've been working with people in recovery for about 46 years. I was trapped in it for a long time. You keep going downhill and you're not really aware of it until you hit the bottom, and that's usually with a grand thud. And people that, I mean, there's all different phases of addiction and everybody's different. Everybody gets into it differently and everybody comes out of it differently. But someplace on the path downwards, you begin to suspect that you're handling this stuff a lot differently than everybody else is. And you are different in that you might be addicted, but that's too horrible to think of. And what I'm trying to do is get people that might think they're addicted. If you think you're addicted, you are. I mean, that's simple. To seek some help. Go to somebody they trust and say, I think I'm in a bucket and I think I need some help. But you go to anybody. It doesn't make any difference who it is. Somebody you trust. And if it's somebody that really is a friend of yours and loves you, then they'll do what's necessary. And that is to respond to your need, which they will do. And it's the whole recovery thing to me has always been a heart-to-heart thing. It's not a brain-to-brain thing. It's not a procedure. It's not a series of protocols or anything else. I see people get well. I got well because people love me, and that's when you're in the depths of an addiction, it's awfully hard to believe that you're lovable. And when people do that, it makes a big difference. If this little old man can do it, then maybe I can. That's my hope. Maybe there may be somebody on the stage or somebody in the audience. This is one of the most invigorating experiences for me that I've ever had. Seeing all this power come together in people. And it's for a positive purpose. It's very, very stimulating to me.
Our next storyteller is Bill Hogan. Bill is a lifelong resident of Wheeling. He graduated from the University of Notre Dame. He was in the United States Air Force for 5.5 years. He completed a 28-day alcoholic rehab program. He was involved in Peace Corps and lived in Africa for 3.5 years. He was a financial advisor, and he's a tremendous artist. You're going to see some of his pictures up on the screen here. Please welcome my friend, Bill Hogan.
let's see, this little insignificant incident happened 46 years ago this month. I don't believe that the people that were there even noticed it, and I know nobody remembers it except me, and I'll never forget it. And it went like this. The Wheeling Country Club was still where the Stratford Springs restaurant is located today. I was home for just a couple of weeks from a treatment facility for alcoholism. And our friends were having a brunch with folks in the neighborhood. It was the beginning of the holiday season, and it was my social debut as a very different person. I was very nervous and frightened without the social lubricant in me and a bourbon and water to hang on to. I didn't know where to stand, what to do with my hands, what I would say if someone asked me, "Have you been away?" or any other innocent, meaningless question. Out of habit, I guess, I walked over to the bar. One of my old bartender buddies came over and set a bourbon and water in front of me. Gene knew everyone in town and their favorite drink. When I said I wanted a soft drink, he made a big joke of it, not knowing my circumstances, and said with good nature that they were out of soft drinks. I was embarrassed and confused and would have dived into a hole if one were available. Without a very large bartender, well over 6 feet and 250 pounds, I never saw him before, came over, bumping Gene, actually body blocking him out of the way, and with a big reassuring smile, showed me every bottle of soft drink and offered to make me a Virgin Mary. He put me at ease. Later, just before we sat down to eat, the big bartender walked out from behind the bar to where I was talking with a group and said, as he extended his hand, and as I shook his hand, he said, "Mr. Hogan, I just want to wish you a happy New Year." Then he turned and returned to the position behind the bar. I never saw him again. I never saw him before. It has been a number of years, but I will never forget his kindness or stop wondering how he knew my situation. Our guardian angels are with us, or he wouldn't be here tonight. I'm very lucky I got to see one of mine. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bill. We all need guardian angels. I'm glad that you were able to see yours. Our next storyteller is Alexis Nice. Alexis, yeah, applause. Yeah. Alexis was born and raised in West Virginia and brought up through a troubled childhood. She battles depression and anxiety and journals her struggles and enjoys speaking to and helping people facing tough times. She enjoys heavy metal, poetry, and flowers. She models and promotes bands and clothing companies. She's a true child at heart and loves meeting new people and making friends. Please welcome Alexis Nice.
"I'm fine" is one of the only phrases I've ever said that I've been lying. I've been good, bad, okay, and in between, but I've never been fine. I've never been fine with the bloodshot eyes, not even from crying, because that takes an effort that I don't have. The bloodshot eyes are for not sleeping from days on end, because closing my eyes means I'm alone with my thoughts. I was never fine with losing friends because I wasn't able to leave my bed or even talk. I was never fine with being so physically sick from school that I thought I was dying. I was never fine with being a zombie because of my medications. And I was never ever fine with not being fine. I've always wanted to help people, to take care of them and guide them, but nobody wants to listen to the girl with the shaky, quiet voice and the tired eyes, even though she's been through it all and is still fighting. And even if they don't, she still wants them to know that it's fine to not be fine, because you are beautiful, you are worth it, and you are loved. If you take anything from me today, in this minute, I want you to take my pain and know that you are not alone, for I will fight with you.
Great job, Alexis. Our next storyteller is Brandy Neokra. Brandy is a social worker in Parkersburg, West Virginia. She's originally from northeastern Pennsylvania, but has been living in West Virginia for about 12 years. She was diagnosed with major depressive disorder in her early 20s, but she's been dealing with its symptoms since early adolescence. Please join me in welcoming Brandy Neokra.
For me, depression is like the demon that lives inside me and pokes its head out at the most inopportune times. I spent the majority of my life living with this voice in my head that was me, but not me. It was, and is, the worst parts of me, given life and voice. It's the thing with the poison fangs, the claws that grip my vitals, the whisper that says I'm not good enough, that the world would be better off without me. It's the anxiety that every time I open my mouth, I'm saying the wrong thing. The constant repetition after I've said something that what I've just said was so stupid. That moment where I tell myself I'm a complete idiot and I should just never speak again. I experience depression as perfectionism gone rogue. My brain examines every single flaw and refuses to let go until I've broken myself down so far that I'm sure I'll never be good enough for anything. As a teenager and young adult, it felt like I was living with a constant internal scream, like the tinnitus ringing you get sometimes, but so much louder. It was a constant stream of everything that was wrong with me and my life and how much of a terrible person I was. The thing I thought the most those days was, please, dear God, just make it stop. Over the years, I've tried many things to just feel better, to make myself believe that I'm not the overwhelming failure that I can make myself out to be. Some things have worked for me, and some haven't. Let me start with this short list of things I found didn't work for me. Drinking, drugs, relationships, sex, eating, picking fights. I'd go on, but I said this was going to be a short list. And so began my period of experimentation with leaving the planet for a while, because being drunk or high or wrapped up in a never-ending deluge of drama took my focus off my own madness. In high school, anger was the only way I could find to keep people at a distance so they wouldn't know just how not okay I was. I don't fully understand why I couldn't tell anyone that, even to this day. Something to do with wanting to appear fearless and invincible, or with appearing not to be vulnerable, or with this knowledge I had that even though I spent so much time helping everyone else with their problems, no one cared about mine. Whether or not that was true was not the issue. That's just how I felt about it at the time. During these years, I thought about ending my life more than I care to admit. What many people don't understand is that I didn't really want to die. I just wanted not to be in such agonizing, debilitating pain. At that point, there were two thoughts that saved me from permanently ending my pain. The first was, who would have to clean this up? And the second was, who's going to take care of my cat? They got me through when I was this close to an irreversible choice. In moments when I was further from the edge, but not much, I would also think of my family and know that I couldn't cause them the kind of pain that I was feeling. Fast forward to one of the darkest points of my life. I was 3 hours from home, from family and friends, with coworkers I had only known for a couple of months. I had panic attacks so severe I dry heaved and threw up almost every day, and I was in way over my head. After a few months, I knew that I needed to go home. One day, I'd gone to the doctor, but ended up seeing the nurse practitioner instead. She asked me what the problem was, and suddenly, my whole life story was pouring out to a complete stranger. I, the girl who joked that her lady balls were too big for her to cry in the theater, was in hysterics in this woman's exam room. What she did next probably saved my life. She wrote me a prescription for Effexor XR. Now, I'm not saying that medication is always the answer, but it was the answer for me at that point. And I went home. It was another year or so before I really, truly came to the realization that the things I was doing to cope weren't working, and I needed to try something else. So I started therapy. I went on and off for a couple of years, mostly on, and it helped. For me, telling a stranger that I don't know if I have the strength to go on is infinitely easier than telling anyone in my family or friend group. Someone has to be the stalwart, sassy, strong one, and I assign myself that role to make sense of the chaos around me. So medication and therapy have helped. They didn't cure my depression, but they've helped me realize that all the pain and negative thinking is the depression talking. They've gotten me to the point that I can now see my unhealthy thoughts for what they are. I can't stop a bout of depression, but I can see it coming and recognize it when it's here and do things to keep it from completely knocking me on my butt. Exercise is another thing that helps. I go to the gym 3 times a week and sweat. I slam medicine balls and imagine pushing my rage and difficult feelings from my body. I go to yoga. I listen to music while I do chores. Podcasts help too. The Hilarious World of Depression is one that I listen to when I'm feeling particularly down. And so I'd like to leave you all with one final thought. Mental health isn't something that has a cure. Like diabetes, it's just a thing you have or you don't. But that doesn't mean that if you've got depression or anxiety or bipolar or whatever, that you have to lay down and let it run roughshod over you. Help is out there, and there are options. There are always options. All you have to do is reach out, and someone will reach back. Thank you.
So good, so talented. Thank you, Brandy.
I love telling stories. That's what I do in my professional life. I'm a professor and I teach my students how to use storytelling as a means of communication, obviously, but also as a tool for healing, for educating, for instructing, all those things that are important in life. And I thought, I want to tell my story. What an awesome opportunity it would be to tell the story. And then when I found out that it was at the historic Capitol Theater, I said, absolutely, where do I sign? When do I have to be here? To be on stage with this group of people that are telling these amazing stories in a fearless way, that is the best part of it for me. Because I'm an author too, I write books about my experiences, so it's kind of like a secondhand thing, but seeing how some of the people in the show are just so fearless, telling these really deep, emotional, painful stories about themselves, that's the best part of it for me. Even though we've come a long way in it being socially acceptable, for lack of a better phrase, to talk about mental illness in a public way, I think having a show with this many cast members in it and then presenting at this venue in Wheeling, advertising it, getting people to come, I mean, we have billboards, it's incredibly empowering because if nothing else happens tonight, I just want people to feel that they're not alone in whatever their struggle is, whether it's something that they share with me or something that they share with one of our other cast members. My goal is that there's someone in the audience who says, that's me, I have that problem, and I want to get help for it. I want to come out of the darkness and start talking about it and get someone to help me with my problem so that I can feel better. I want people to walk out of here knowing that there's hope and that they can feel better.
Our next storyteller is Christina Fasonic. Christina, who has a PhD in English, is a professor and author from Wheeling, West Virginia. She's a 1996 graduate of West Liberty University. Her writing primarily focuses on her experiences with mental illness, including her most recent book, The Optimistic Food Addict, Recovering from Binge Eating Disorder. She loves cats and spending time with her beloved son, Tristan. Please join me in welcoming Christina Fasonic.
thunder thighs, big girl, chubby, fatty, butterball, husky, fat pig, gross, disgusting. These are some of the words that people have used to describe me over the course of my life. In fact, the body-focused name-calling began just hours after I first drew breath. My mother tells the story of how the pediatric nurses chided my newborn thighs in the nursery. "Look how big they are, Mama, and she is such a little baby otherwise." And so it continued until I heard the voices of others louder than my own, until the insults and jibes drowned out the compliments. By the time I went on a class swimming trip at age 9, the invectives had done their worst. I was so embarrassed about how my 4th grade body would look in a bathing suit that I sat on a bench at the pool in the sweltering heat of that early fall day, watching my classmates splash and play. I was so ashamed of my little girl form that I denied myself the simple pleasure of swimming with my friends. I was 9 years old. Of course, the voices only intensified as I made my way towards puberty and began developing bigger hips and breasts. By the time I was sexually assaulted at age 11, I could no longer find anything positive about my body, and the body dysmorphia led to binge eating disorder. To hide from my pain, I ate. To shield myself from bullies, I ate. To escape negative, intrusive thoughts, I ate. Food became my best friend and my worst enemy. As I grew into adulthood, I tried every diet I could find, which led to weight fluctuations of hundreds and hundreds of pounds over the years. My weight and my body had become the enemy and the source of all that was wrong in my life. But I could not stop binging for long. Every trauma pushed me back into the food. When my daughter was murdered when I was 18 years old, I ate. When my son died a decade later, I ate. When I struggled through poverty and stress in my doctoral program, I ate. When my home burned down and took the lives of my 6 cats, I ate. I ate because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to find comfort any other way. I had read all of the self-help books. I had been to countless therapists. I had many friends to call for reassurance. And yet my disease, binge eating disorder, led me to believe that food was the only true source of peace. But like any addict knows, this disease lies. Food was making me sick. Binge eating disorder was slowly taking my life, and the little comfort I received was from food that was replaced by the guilt and the shame before I ever took my last bite. Then one night, around 3 a.m., when my son was just a few years old, I found myself sitting on the living room floor eating my 3rd bowl of homemade buttercream frosting. I was crying, and I felt sick. It didn't even taste good anymore, but I kept eating and eating and crying and eating. I realized in that moment, for the first time in more than 30 years of harming myself with food, that I had a serious psychological problem that had nothing to do with a lack of willpower. I needed help. I turned to the National Eating Disorders Association, and they connected me with one of their navigators who helped me understand binge eating disorder and steps that I could take to find treatment. I entered recovery from binge eating disorder shortly thereafter, and as anyone who has been through recovery knows, that first year to year and a half is both horrible and exhilarating. After the first month of withdrawal and grief, I got high on recovery and soon felt invincible. I left. I felt like I had won, that I had beaten binge eating disorder for good. And then one morning, while walking into a local coffee shop, a table full of men ogled me in such a sexually overt way that I wanted to climb out of my own body. I wanted to run away. Suddenly, I was that 11-year-old girl again, facing my rapist. I got my coffee and left. I cried during the entire hour's drive to work. 3 months later, I found myself sitting in the car just down the street from my house, eating a jar of marshmallow cream with my hands, white sticky sugar all over my face and work clothes. I was once again deep in the food and deep in my mental illness. And those voices that said hurtful things about my body were back, and in such a foment that I could hear little else. My mind was so dark that I could barely function. I struggled with work. I struggled with home. I struggled with basic self-care. I was sicker than I had ever been before. Then one afternoon, a friend reached his hand out to me. In the same way I had reached my hand out to the thousands of group members who turned to me for support in their recovery journey, I took his hand and he pulled me out of the darkness, little by little. I know that psychologists often tell us that happiness is better found inside ourselves, but my friend made me realize that sometimes we need someone to go into the dark and find us, to help us believe that our lights are worth shining, that we are beautiful, that we are worth the tremendous effort it takes to find recovery once again. I know now that there is no cure for binge eating disorder, but there is hope. There are times when I string together more good days than bad days, more joyful weeks than sad weeks, more peaceful months than chaotic months. As I continue on this journey called life, I know only one thing for sure. Right now, right in this moment, I am free of the thoughts that have hurt me for so long. I am free of compulsive behaviors with food. I have only my breath and the sound of my own beautiful voice telling you my story.
Thank you so much, Christina. Thanks for shedding light on binge eating disorder. Our next storyteller is Cheryl Childers. Cheryl uses art to help cope with and manage her disability, which is schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type. Her art has been exhibited at the West Virginia Creative Arts Center in Morgantown, at the West Virginia Diversifying Perspectives Art Contest in Charleston, and in Artworks in Wheeling at the Mental Health Awareness Exhibit. In 2012, she organized her own art show at the Methodist Community Center in Moundsville, West Virginia. Please join me in welcoming Cheryl Childers.
My name is Cheryl Childers. I have schizoaffective disorder, bipolar type. I have managed my illness for approximately 30 years. It's been a battle I wouldn't wish on anyone. I don't blame anyone, but I did blame myself for years. I married at the age of 18. I gave birth to a daughter, Jody Dawn. Things went well for about 5 years. Then I became pregnant with my son, Samuel. After his birth, the chemicals and hormones in my body were not working right. I became very sick. I remember taking the children to my sister's, and my son didn't have a coat on. It was winter. I had laid one out for him, but my daughter asked for the coat for her doll. I gave her the doll, the coat meant for the baby. She put it on her Cabbage Patch doll. That's when my family saw the illness coming out. My sister called my husband, but Rick was working away. He wouldn't be there till evening. He came that evening and took me to a mental health facility. He tried to get me help, but I refused. I had never been violent before. I hit him so hard, he said he's never been hit harder, even by a man. The police were called. The policeman dealt with the situation very well. He talked with me and I agreed to go. I was in a mental hospital for 2 months. I received shock treatment. But the worst pain suffered was the terrible guilt of being away from my children. The delusions I'm having were terrible. I thought my children were in danger. I didn't know they were getting fed. I came home a different person. I felt isolated, cut off, and bent up inside myself. I couldn't see the beauty in the world. I was institutionalized on and off for approximately 30 years. When my daughter received a writing award, I wasn't there. When my son hit baseball, I wasn't there. I don't know how I made it out of the madness. I realize now it was because of a God of love. I remember being in the hospital. I saw a light as I was walking down the hall. I followed the light. It was an open door. Inside was an arts and crafts room. I worked first as a calligrapher, crafter, writer, and now an artist. I was so inspired by the arts and crafts there. An artist is the last trade I thought I would be into. I am able to express myself emotionally through my art. My family encouraged me to go for it. I'm grateful to be a part of This Is My Brave. My daughter currently lives in New York City. She is working on her doctorate in American Studies. My son is a computer programmer at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. He is also a scholar. We have strong relationships now. I missed a lot of their childhood, but I feel now that I finally got my life back. I love doing art, and currently I'm cleaning out a room in my home to make a studio. God made a way for me through this struggle called mental illness. I'm grateful to be able to share my story. Here's the piece of art, which was inspired by my daughter, which also inspired this poem. Here's the poem written for my daughter, simply entitled Love. The world awaits. Even the peacock hesitates. Open your wings, my love. Show them the true colors of your heart, because in every sunset, we're never apart.
Thank you, Cheryl. You are so incredibly brave. Our next storyteller is Lara Lawson. Lara is a native of Milton, West Virginia. She has a master's in sociology from Marshall University, and she works as a development director for Recovery Point in West Virginia. She's married to Zach Lawson and mom to Zeta. Please welcome Lara Lawson.
This is called dramatic visioning. My manic episodes are full of great ideas. I even have the confidence that I can achieve them. It's just impossible to function when you aren't sleeping or going to work or capable of sustained concentration. In my last episode, I created a fundraising page to fight the overdose epidemic. The plan lacked strategy, but it wasn't without passion. I went to the hospital early one morning to meet someone who had just fallen victim to an overdose. I convinced him to go to treatment. My mania shows me the future. The one thing I could focus on was social media. It's always awake. You can talk directly to famous people and they might hear you. I got a response from a famous social justice organizer, and I told my mother I was going to work for Black Lives Matter. She didn't believe me. I was drifting further from reality every day, and she's seen my manic episodes before. I feel like I can control it until the ideas grow too big, too fast, and too wrong, and then I can't. My last manic episode was dramatic, like a movie. There was a high-speed chase, an arrest, a perp walk, and soliloquies from a jail cell. There was a locked-ward mental hospital. The hospital was better than jail, with rubber furniture bolted to the floor. The days passed in group sessions and outdoor recreation in an AstroTurf courtyard. It was called the Pink Castle by the folks in jail, but it was not a castle at all. It was full of thick glass walls for constant observation and institutional color schemes. The only natural things to touch were the leaves and sticks that flew into the courtyard after a storm, or perhaps that a bird dropped. I always picked up whatever leaf or tiny stick I could find to hold it and feel connected to the world outside of the locked ward. At mealtimes, every patient watched the groundhogs or peaceful deer walk across the field outside the window. I envied their freedom. The cast of characters included quiet, humble old men who had spent years inside those walls, occasionally screaming women in an isolation room, people who couldn't quite keep stable regardless of interventions, one person who had the habit of eating inedible objects, one who was rumored to be dangerous, but only gave me lovely colored drawings, and others who seemed like anyone you would meet on the street. There was little to do. I read the books Unbroken and Paper Towns, and listened to an old iPod while walking laps through the long halls. I got notebooks and awful ballpoint safety pens to write sometimes. I filled 2 or 3 of them with who knows what. Finally, I was deemed competent to face a judge for my crime again after nearly 2 months. I had to return to jail and spend a week with the pretrial felon population. Luckily, I had street cred for being the girl who led a high-speed car chase in her bathing suit. I went home on confinement to keep on picking up the pieces of my life. I received unemployment because I was fired from my job. I spent 6 months applying to everything. I interviewed and I got nothing. My unemployment ran out and I ran to the last resort, the local McDonald's. I wore the uniform and served customers for 30 hours a week. I found purpose and worth within myself again. And then I found a good job prospect with an addiction recovery organization I respected. I interviewed, nailed it, and took the offer. As I worked on something I cared about, my mental health stabilized. Work and purpose are essential to my recovery. I loved my work, and it helped me to help others. And then a higher position opened. I applied, I interviewed, nailed it, and accepted the challenge. The day after the nation was rocked by an outbreak of 26 overdoses in Huntington. I had gotten my dream job, fundraising to stop the overdose epidemic. My mania shows me the future. I didn't start owning my story until the feeling that everything would be snatched away started to subside. When I shared my story with my boss, he encouraged me to share it more. It's amazing to work where mental health is taken seriously and second chances are real. In the winter, I went to the state capitol with a bunch of women waving signs asking for their own second chances. The Second Chance for Employment Act passed in the final moments of the legislative session. Later in the year, I was invited to be on the interim board for the Call to Action for Racial Equality. I helped organize a Black Lives Matter rally at the state capitol on August 20th that united 500 people fighting for racial justice. My mania shows me the future. My mania in jail was its own story, and I'm cursed to remember most of it. My psychosis was out of control, and I experienced many visions. I imagined there was a massive flood coming. The day of my arrest was June 23rd, 2015. On June 23rd, 2016, West Virginia saw a 1,000-year flood. I imagined that if we all focused and tried hard enough that we could raise my friends who have died from overdoses from the dead. And although they are long buried, through my job, I get to know people who have been revived and go on to live in recovery. I imagined organizing a big concert, and now I'm working with a group to put on a big concert to raise funds to help communities overcome the substance use disorder epidemic called Hope in the Hills. My mania shows me the future. I am living a recovery that is my destiny. No one will convince me that this was a coincidence. Thanks to my psychiatrist, a great therapist, peer support, religiously taking my medication, a supportive employer, total abstinence from drugs and alcohol, my family and my friends, I am making my dramatic visions come to life. Mania is dangerous, but it made me fearless. I share my story with you in hopes that you might find your own path to fearlessness. I don't recommend anyone seek it in the way that I stumbled onto it, because I am lucky to have lived through this. But I want the millions of people with mental illnesses to find recovery and be the person they are meant to be. I want you to know that recovery is possible. I want you to be brave and imagine the world that we can make together, and let's make it.
That was such a powerful story of recovery. We thank you so much for sharing.
I think this is the beginning of mental health awareness.
It was just refreshing hearing them come out with what's been pent up inside of them.
I think people will realize what other people are going through on a daily basis. I think it takes a lot of courage to get up on stage in front of all these people and tell about what you had to go through.
Somewhat familiar with some of the stories that were given, some of the testimonies that were given, And I can appreciate what these people have gone through. Very powerful, very powerful.